When a desperate mother walks into a ballroom full of billionaires, she never expects to be the one auctioned. Raindrops clung stubbornly to the cracked windshield of Imani's sedan, their pattern erratic, like the heartbeat pounding in her chest. She parked 2 blocks away from the Grand Orchid Hotel, too embarrassed to let the valet see her 12-year-old rust bucket. As she stepped out, the humid Miami air clung to her skin and made her cotton dress feel heavier than it already was. Her fingers trembled as she smoothed the skirt down over her hips. The dress, a faded lavender Sunday church special from 2018, had been restitched along the seams twice already. It held memories of baptisms and borrowed dignity, but tonight it was all she had. Her heels clicked awkwardly against the slick pavement as she moved toward the entrance, clutching a worn black clutch like it was armor. Earlier that evening, Caleb had asked for pancakes. "You promised pancakes, Mommy," he'd said with that little furrow in his brow, the one he inherited from his father. Imani had leaned down, kissed his forehead, and whispered, "Mommy's going to find us a way. A real way this time." That promise still burned on her tongue. The Grand Orchid loomed ahead, all glass and white stone and gold trim, like something out of a movie she had no business starring in. 2 doormen flanked the main entrance, both in crisp tuxedos. Imani hesitated before approaching her heart, nearly backing out on her, but a sudden gust of wind pushed her forward. Inside, the hotel swallowed her whole. Warm lighting cascaded from crystal chandeliers above a sea of designer gowns, polished shoes, and laughter as smooth as the jazz quartet playing in the corner. The scent of floral arrangements mixed with expensive cologne made her slightly dizzy. Servers floated by with champagne flutes and shrimp cocktails, weaving effortlessly between clutches of Miami's wealthiest. Imani, drenched in nerves and cotton, felt like a misplaced chess piece in a game she didn't understand. She moved toward the registration table where a young man in a headset gave her a once-over and said, "Catering goes through the side entrance, miss." Her cheeks flushed. "I'm not with catering." He frowned, checked his clipboard, and then his expression shifted. Guest of Ms. Whitney. You're late." Imani gave a polite smile, pretending she knew what he meant, and let herself be ushered toward the ballroom doors. The room beyond opened like a dream, round tables dressed in ivory linen, each centerpiece a towering bouquet of pink orchids. A soft hush hung in the air as the MC took the stage microphone in hand. "Ladies and gentlemen," he boomed, "welcome to the spring benefit auction." Applause, laughter, a clinking of glasses. Imani slid into a corner, trying to disappear. She glanced around silk gowns in bold colors, gold jewelry that sparkled even under the dim lights. Her eyes caught on a woman in emerald green sipping champagne while giggling with a man whose watch probably cost more than Imani's yearly rent. The contrast hit her hard. "I don't even have pantyhose without a run in it," she muttered under her breath. At that moment, a matronly woman with silver-streaked hair caught her eye from across the room. Dressed in a navy wrap and pearl earrings, she gave Imani a kind, assessing look. Then she turned away, fading back into the audience. Imani would later learn her name was Abuela Rosa. The MC continued introducing the rules of the auction. Each guest of honor tonight will be presented for bidding. Remember, all proceeds go to the Hope for Tomorrow Orphanage Initiative. People cheered again. Imani didn't understand. She hadn't signed up for anything. Her friend Dana had said it was just a networking event, show up, smile, maybe pass her resume around. Before she could slip away, a hand touched her elbow. "You're on deck," whispered a woman with a clipboard and headset. "Excuse me, your name's Imani Green, right, Ms. Whitney's guest?" Yes." "Perfect. You're next. Just walk up the stairs when I cue you." She didn't move. "Don't worry, sweetheart." The woman smiled. "You'll be fine. Just remember to smile when the lights hit you." And then she was gone. Imani's throat closed. Her palms dampened. She wanted to run, but her feet stayed rooted to the plush carpeting. Moments later, she heard her name. "Next up," the MC announced, "we have a very special guest, Ms. Imani Green." A spotlight. The world froze. She walked up the steps like a woman in a dream. The stage lights painted everything in gold and shadows. As she faced the sea of faces, she tried not to cry. Applause rose scattered and confused. Someone in the front row tilted their head. Then the bidding began. 50,000, 75, 100. Silence. And then a voice from the back. 1,000,000. The ballroom stilled. Even the band paused mid-note. Heads turned toward the voice that had just shattered the rhythm of polite bidding like a thunderclap in a museum. It hadn't been shouted nor delivered with flair. It was quiet, measured, but it carried the weight of command. 1,000,000, the voice repeated. Imani's eyes instinctively scanned the crowd. Toward the back of the room, standing just inside the arch of a column, was a man in a jet-black tuxedo. Broad shoulders, perfectly trimmed beard. Beside him, a tall woman in crimson with glossy hair and a diamond necklace that could have lit a hallway leaned in and hissed something in his ear. He didn't flinch. She didn't know him, that was certain. Whispers spread like ripples on still water. A few chuckled awkwardly, assuming it was a stunt or a joke. But the MC cleared his throat, glancing toward the control booth, then looked back out over the room. "Do I hear 1.1, he called. Silence. No one dared challenge the number or the man behind it. Going once, he continued with a nervous smile, going twice. Sold to Mr. He hesitated. Our anonymous bidder in the rear. There was scattered applause. The pianist tried to recover the atmosphere with a light, upbeat tune, but the air had already changed. The crowd buzzed, but it wasn't festive anymore. It was curious, edgy. Imani was ushered off the stage before she could even comprehend what had just happened. She descended the velvet steps on shaky legs, holding the rail tighter than she meant to. Someone touched her elbow again. Another staff member with a kind face and a headset. "This way, Ms. Green." The woman guided her around the perimeter of the ballroom through a narrow side door that led to a quieter corridor. The hallway smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and something floral. The noise of the crowd faded into a hum behind them. Imani's breath caught as the door behind her clicked shut. Then she saw him. The man who had bid $1,000,000 now stood at the end of the hallway, flanked by two security guards in dark suits. He didn't move toward her. Instead, he waited. Imani's feet hesitated. The hallway stretched long in that moment, longer than it was, and her mind whirred with possibilities. Was this a mistake? A trick A set up? Still she walked. When she reached him, she stopped just short of an arm's length. He smelled like expensive cologne and cool rain, but his face gave nothing away. "You may call me Mr. Al-Nasser," he said evenly, "until further notice." Imani blinked. Her lips parted, searching for a reply, but nothing came. She expected arrogance, a smirk, or even the sleazy gleam of entitlement she'd seen in rich men before. But there was none of that. Just calm, controlled, professional even. She started, then stopped. He raised a hand lightly, not to silence her, but to ease the tension. "There will be a car waiting for you outside. It will take you home. My assistant will reach out tomorrow morning. We'll keep communication clear and limited until terms are clarified." Terms? He met her gaze for the first time, and there was something unsettling in the way he looked at her, not cruel, but calculating, as if she were a math problem he intended to solve. "This was not a mistake," he said. "You were meant to be here tonight." Before she could respond, he turned and walked away. One of the security guards nodded politely, motioning her toward a side exit. Imani followed her heels, whispering against the marble floors, her mind still tangled in the moment. She exited into the loading bay, where a black limousine idled quietly, its chrome grille glinting under soft amber lights. The driver opened the door with a stiff nod. Inside, the leather seats were warm, the air scented with something soothing, sandalwood and citrus. Imani sank into the seat like her body had finally caught up with the shock. The door closed. The limo eased into traffic. She fished her phone from her clutch and blinked at the brightness of the screen. Notifications blinked from various apps, but her eyes went to the top of the screen to a single newest message. It was from her landlord. Your keys will no longer work after 10 a.m. tomorrow. She stared at the words until they blurred. The seat suddenly felt colder. The million-dollar moment she'd just lived through didn't mean she had a place to go. Imani closed her eyes and leaned her head against the tinted glass. Tomorrow would come, and she still had pancakes to make. The limousine continued down Biscayne Boulevard, its tires whispering over wet asphalt. Miami's lights blurred through the drizzle, painting streaks of gold and crimson across the windows. Inside, Imani sat motionless, phone still in her lap, the message from her landlord glowing like a quiet threat. She typed a reply, something pleading, something polite, but deleted it before sending. What could she even say? Please wait. I've just been auctioned for $1 million. It sounded ridiculous, even in her head. She checked on Caleb's nanny cam. Her little boy had fallen asleep in front of the TV blanket, half off, his tiny chest rising and falling steadily. The cartoon menu looped in the background. Imani smiled faintly through a prick of tears. He'd waited up for her, probably hungry, probably still expecting pancakes in the morning. The thought grounded her. She didn't know what had just happened. She didn't know who Mr. Al Nasser really was or what this purchase truly meant. But she knew one thing: she had to keep Caleb safe. And tonight had bought her a little time. The limo pulled into her building's lot with a soft jolt. Not the front entrance, no, the back, near the alleyway and trash bins. Less attention. She was grateful. The driver stepped out, holding a large black umbrella over her. No words, just a nod. Imani walked briskly toward the side door, heels tapping against cracked concrete. The air smelled of damp cardboard and stale rain. As she reached the security pad, she hesitated, staring at it like it might deny her entry already. But the key still worked for now. Inside the hallway, lights flickered. The elevator was broken again, so she took the stairs up to the 4th floor, gripping the rail with the same white-knuckled tension she'd had on stage earlier that night. When she entered her apartment, the warm scent of maple syrup and laundry detergent greeted her like an old friend. Caleb stirred slightly as she lifted him from the couch and carried him to his little bed. His curls were damp with sweat. She wiped his forehead gently with the sleeve of her sweater. "I got us something," she whispered, kissing his temple. "A little time." She didn't sleep that night. Instead, she sat by the window in her robe, watching the rain beat on the glass and run in slow, meandering paths toward the sill. At 3:18 a.m., her phone pinged. It was a message from an unknown number. "Your meeting with Mr. Al Nasser's office is scheduled for 10:00 a.m. Transportation will be provided. Do not be late." Imani exhaled. Her eyes wandered toward the pantry bare. The fridge hummed quietly, holding little more than milk and a container of leftover mac and cheese. Before dawn, she flipped pancakes on a scratch griddle, humming low so Caleb wouldn't wake too early. She made them just the way he liked, golden with a splash of vanilla. It was the only promise she knew she could still keep. When morning came, she dressed in the best thing she had: a navy blouse that no longer fit perfectly, and slacks she'd ironed the night before. She tied her hair back and checked her reflection twice, willing herself to look like someone in control. At exactly 9:55 a.m., the black car was waiting outside. Not a limo this time, an SUV with tinted windows and silent doors. The driver offered no conversation, just a nod and the same branded scent lingering in the air. They drove through the glittering downtown, past the marina, and toward a building she'd only ever seen on the local news. Tall, glass, untouchable. When she stepped into the lobby, a woman in a sleek gray suit greeted her. "Ms. Green, welcome. This way." Imani followed her through a corridor of marble and glass. Everyone they passed looked like they belonged in magazines, polished, focused, powerful. She felt like a misplaced page from a worn paperback. They reached a private elevator. The assistant pressed a key card. The doors slid open. Imani stepped in alone. As the elevator rose, she clutched her purse tighter, her heart tapping against her ribs in a rhythm she couldn't slow. She replayed Mr. Al Nasser's words from the night before. "You were meant to be here." The elevator dinged softly. Floor 37. When the doors parted, She stepped into a room of sunlight and silence. And there he was, standing by the window, arms crossed the city sprawling behind him like a conquered empire. Being bought is one thing. Living like you belong, that's a whole other kind of torture. The morning light streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long golden stripes across the marble floor of the Al Nasser estate. Imani stood still in the center of the guest suite, wrapped in one of the plushest bathrobes she'd ever touched, trying not to feel like she was trespassing. Her duffel bag lay untouched in the corner, dwarfed by the scale of the room, high ceilings, mirrored dressers, and a king-size bed too big for one. She had slept fitfully torn between the softness of Egyptian cotton sheets and the weight of unfamiliar walls. Now the silence pressed against her ears, broken only by the sound of gulls and waves just beyond the terrace. There was a knock, sharp, efficient. Imani tightened the robe around her waist. Yes, she called. The door opened to reveal a tall, stone-faced woman in a slate-gray uniform. Good morning, Ms. Green. I'm Pilar House Staff Coordinator. Mr. Al Nasser asked that I ensure your transition is comfortable. Imani stepped forward. I don't need anything. I'm just... Pilar held up a hanger draped with a sleek navy ensemble. House policy requires assigned attire for guests under extended arrangement. You'll find a full set in the wardrobe. Imani's brow furrowed. I didn't agree to wear a uniform. Pilar's expression didn't flicker. Of course. I'll inform Mr. Al Nasser you've declined. The door closed with a final click. Imani stared at the outfit. Silk-lined. Not cheap. But still, why did it feel like permission? Downstairs, the estate hummed with restrained activity. People moved like shadows, maids adjusting fresh flowers, a chef wheeling in covered dishes. Imani made her way toward the veranda where Layla was already seated, legs crossed at the ankles, sipping something amber in a crystal glass. Well, Layla purred, barely glancing up, at least you brushed your hair today. Imani inhaled through her nose. Morning. Is it? Layla gestured to the other women at the table, polished, perfumed all diamonds and smooth condescension. You missed the yoga class. We've already started our daily tea. Imani looked at the spread delicate pastries, imported jam tea, served in porcelain cups with gold rims. She reached for a chair. Layla's voice was smooth as silk and twice as cutting. This is a closed gathering. You'll find the kitchen down the hall if you're hungry. One of the women giggled. Imani's hand froze midair. She let it drop, the sting sharp, but not new. A voice interrupted the tension. Miss Green said, Abuela Rosa, appearing with uncanny timing. Join me in the library. I need a young mind to help me rearrange some shelves. Imani turned gratefully, escaping the table without another word. Rosa led her through a quiet hallway into the oldest part of the mansion, a library rich with dark wood, the scent of old leather and lemon polish. Sit, Rosa said gently, patting the cushion beside her. That one in pink, she meant. Layla has a sharp tongue, but a dull heart. Don't waste energy on her games. Imani blinked, startled by the kindness. You don't even know me. Rosa smiled without looking. I know storms, and I see one behind your eyes. For the first time that morning, Imani allowed her shoulders to drop. On the far side of the room, a tall figure appeared in the doorway. Rafik. He walked in silently, hands behind his back, gaze sweeping the spines of the books until it landed on Imani. Medical reference, he asked, noting the title in her lap. I used to be a nurse, she said. Still like to keep sharp. There was the ghost of a nod. You're more than a mother, Ms. Green. Don't forget that. Before she could reply, he turned and left. That night, Imani stood by the bay windows in her guest suite, cradling a warm mug of chamomile tea she'd made herself in the butler's pantry. The lights across the water shimmered like restless fireflies, and the wind carried the salt of the sea up through the open windows. But the beauty of the place couldn't hide the coldness in the air or in the walls. The mansion was so quiet it felt curated like a showroom. It didn't breathe like a real home. She thought about Caleb and wondered what he would have said about the koi pond or the ceilings tall as giraffes. Her heart tugged as she remembered his little note tucked in the side pocket of her purse, the one with crayon hearts and their secret words scrawled in block letters, lemon pie. The silence was broken by the faint echo of laughter. Women's voices, sharp and lilting, floated from the grand staircase. Imani stepped out of her room and padded softly down the hallway. The dining hall was lit in gold and amber. Layla sat at the head of the table, swirling a glass of wine. Two guests flanked her, stylish women in couture, who looked like they belonged on fashion spreads, not sitting around gossiping past midnight. Imani paused just outside view, heart beating fast. "She's not the first," Layla was saying, tone casual but razor-edged. "He always finds strays to fix. Broken birds. It's very noble in a patronizing sort of way." One of the women leaned in, smirking. "How long do they usually last?" Layla gave a theatrical shrug. "Depends how quickly they realize charity has an expiration date." The table erupted in knowing chuckles. Imani turned back toward her room, rage and shame warring in her chest. Stray, broken bird. Was that how they saw her? Was that how he saw her? She thought of Rafiq's voice earlier in the library. "You're more than a mother." It had sounded almost kind, but now she wondered, was it just part of the script? Back in her room, she sat on the edge of the bed and pulled out her phone. There was a voice message from Miss Renee. "Girl," the familiar voice drawled, soft and comforting. "I just heard from Gianna. You're staying in some billionaire's castle now, Lord. I hope it's not a Lifetime movie plot. Listen, whatever this is, don't lose yourself in it. You've always had more fight in you than anyone I know. I mean it. Text me when you can. I love you." Imani closed her eyes. That voice, warm like cornbread fresh from the oven, made her feel real again. She decided to shower, trying to wash off the chill that no robe or chamomile could touch. The bathroom was spa-sized, with lighting that adjusted automatically and drawers that warmed towels. Everything was designed to pamper, to impress, to soften the fact that none of it was hers. Afterward, she stood in the walk-in closet, staring at the Navy House attire hanging beside her clothes. Pilar must have returned while she was out of the room. A note was clipped to the hanger. "Formal dinner tomorrow at 6 p.m. Appropriate attire required. L." Imani narrowed her eyes. She knew exactly what that meant. Another test, another stage. She chose one of her own outfits, instead a cream blouse and slacks with a faint stain she hoped no one would notice. She laid them out like armor. She would eat dinner tomorrow. She would sit at that table, but she would not be a prop. Dinner was served with the quiet precision of a ballet, every course arriving under silver domes, every plate lifted in unison. Imani sat stiff-backed at the far end of the dining table, across from Layla, who twirled her fork like it was part of a performance. The food was exquisite filet mignon, seared perfectly, asparagus, wrapped in prosciutto, and bread baked with rosemary still warm from the oven. But Imani barely tasted any of it. She was too aware of every sideways glance, every pause in conversation, when she lifted her glass. Rafik, seated near the head of the table, spoke little. His eyes flicked across the room now and then, unreadable. Once or twice they met Imani's, and something flickered there. Not pity, not warmth, something else. Layla leaned back, her voice rising just enough for others to hear. "Tell us, Imani," she said smoothly. "Is it difficult adjusting to all this?" She gestured vaguely. "The silverware, the silence, the expectations. Or is it all just another charity dinner to you?" Imani's hand tightened around her napkin, knuckles pale. "I'm doing just fine," she said evenly. "Thank you for your concern." Layla tilted her head, all sugar and venom. "Of course. You're not the first. There were others, you know. They tried to blend in. Some even made it to the family photo wall. Briefly." The guest chuckled. Rafik didn't react. Imani held her breath. Then Layla said, smiling like a debutante in pearls, "If this were the 1950s, would you be in the house or the backyard?" A hush fell. Even the servers paused. Imani stood up slowly. Her chair made the softest scrape against the floor. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. She picked up her linen napkin, folded it neatly, and placed it beside her untouched dessert. Then she walked out. She didn't hear anyone call after her. Didn't care. Upstairs, her heart was still racing, her hands trembling, but she kept her chin up. Behind her, the security camera in the dining room caught everything, the way she exited, the tilt of her chin, the pause before she left the room. And most of all, it caught Rafik. He watched her go without a word. Then he reached for the small control panel under the table, pressed a discreet button. A quiet beep, and the flames in the fireplace behind him slowly died out. Every mansion has secrets. This one breathes them through its walls. The Al Nasser estate woke slowly on Easter weekend. Gardeners trimmed hedges into perfect symmetry, while kitchen staff prepped waffle batter and citrus syrups. The air was tinged with salt and cinnamon, and somewhere a child's laughter echoed from the estate next door. Imani didn't sleep well. Her room had felt off. Not cold, not haunted, just watched. She sat on the edge of her bed, scrolling absently through old messages from Miss Renee, hoping for something grounding. Her fingers paused on a recent voice note from Caleb sent the night before. She pressed play. "Mommy, if I had a daddy," Caleb's tiny voice said, "I'd want him to wear glasses like Mr. Rafik. He looks like one of the cool teachers, but only if he knows how to make pancakes. You promised pancakes." Imani's breath caught in her throat. The message was followed by a drawing, hastily done in crayon. 3 stick figures, Imani, Caleb, and a tall man in glasses standing protectively beside them, a sun overhead, and the word home scribbled in green. Her hands trembled slightly as she turned the phone over. It wasn't just the innocence of it. It was how close Caleb had gotten, without ever meaning to. She rose, instinct guiding her to the wardrobe. Something felt wrong. She scanned the room, and then she saw it, a thin slit, barely noticeable behind the curtain rod near the ceiling. Embedded discreet was a black pinhole, no larger than a pushpin. A camera. Her stomach flipped. She stood frozen for a moment, then slowly stepped back, tugging the curtain to cover the lens. She didn't scream. She didn't yank it out. She just stood there, breath shallow, eyes burning. Downstairs, brunch prep continued. The dining table had been moved to the back patio, surrounded by lemon trees in bloom. Staff members in pastel uniforms arranged trays of deviled eggs and mini quiches with American flair, honey-glazed ham slices, waffle towers, mason jars of orange blossom mimosas. Layla floated between stations like a bored princess inspecting her kingdom. She wore a floral dress too perfect for the occasion, her heels never touching the grass. At one point, she took a phone call in Arabic voice, low and urgent. When she hung up, she disappeared into the study and didn't return for hours. Meanwhile, in the corner library, Rafik flipped through an envelope labeled Imani Green, miscellaneous records. It had arrived earlier that day, couriered from a law office in Atlanta. Old tax filings, utility bills, school records, and one-page lightweight, almost overlooked, held his gaze. Caleb Green, born July 17, 2016. Mother Imani Green. Father blank. He leaned back in the leather chair, staring at the page, then at the framed photo on his desk. It had been there for years, him with a boy, maybe 4 or 5, on his lap. Not his own son, but someone else's. A friend's child. He couldn't even recall the name. But the boy had curly hair and big brown eyes behind toy glasses. Rafik ran his finger along the frame edge. "Impossible," he muttered. But something tugged at the edge of his reason, Caleb's words. The glasses, the voice message, and the way Imani looked every time someone mentioned the past. He tapped the photo once and exhaled, then reached for his phone, played the voice note again. "You promised pancakes." The voice note played again, just once more, maybe twice. Rafik couldn't explain why he needed to hear it again. Something in the boy's voice pulled at him. Not because it was familiar, but because it shouldn't have felt that way. His phone buzzed. A message from Layla: "Handled the Dubai situation. Details in your encrypted folder." He didn't respond. Across the estate in the solarium, where morning light streaked through glass panels, Abuela Rosa watered the violets she had planted herself. She moved slowly, carefully, and hummed a tune in Spanish that Imani had come to associate with calm. "You're early," the older woman said gently as Imani entered. I couldn't sleep. Your spirit's too noisy, Rosa said, placing down her watering can. There was something in her tone, knowing kind, but edged with warning. Imani didn't answer. Instead, she moved toward the low bookshelf near the window, her fingers grazing the spines like searching for a friend. She pulled one out, Foundations of Modern Cardiology, and opened it absently. You know, Rosa said after a long pause, secrets don't like silence. They rot in it. Imani looked up. I didn't come here with secrets. No, Rosa agreed. But this house collects them, even the ones we think we buried. She turned, then her gaze softening. He watches you, you know. Imani swallowed. Rafik? Not like Layla does. Layla watches to find weakness. Rafik? He watches like he's afraid to see something familiar. Imani let the book fall closed. Later that afternoon, in the main hallway, Layla exited the study briskly, her expression tight. She had spent nearly an hour on calls behind closed doors. No one heard what was said, but Imani, passing by, caught a single phrase muttered into the air as Layla brushed past. Why now? Why her? Back in her room, Imani changed the location of her phone charger, setting it near the mirror instead of the nightstand. She opened her laptop not to browse, but to message Miss Renee. I think they're watching me. Can a hotel room have cameras? The reply came minutes later. Girl, what? What did you sign up for exactly? Imani didn't know how to answer that. She glanced again at the crayon drawing Caleb had sent. The man in it, glasses slightly crooked, smile wide, was standing between them like a protector. She wished she could call him and explain everything. But how do you explain being auctioned? Living in a house where no one says what they mean? Finding cameras where there should be privacy? That evening during Easter brunch prep, Rafik passed her near the lemon trees. They didn't speak, but he paused as if he might, as if some part of him was debating whether to ask something. His eyes dropped momentarily to the iPad in her hands, the screen still lit with Caleb's drawing. Then he kept walking. He made it to his office before unlocking the encrypted folder Layla had mentioned. There, buried beneath transactions and memos, was a flagged item. Transfer confirmed. March 30th. Dubai account, $250,000. Memo Consulting. PR Containment. He stared at it unmoving. Rafik was not a man easily surprised. But this. He picked up the crumpled paper beside him again. Caleb's birth certificate. And then the photo. And then, for the third time, he played the recording. The silence in Rafik's study felt dense, like it could swallow even the ticking of the old clock on the far wall. He sat motionless, the drawing in one hand, the birth certificate in the other, the boy's voice still echoing in the back of his mind. The crayon sketch showed a child's version of peace, a son, a house, and a family. No questions, no doubts, just lines and color and innocence. He didn't know what shook him more, that the image reminded him of something he never had, or that the boy had drawn him into it. And the father's name, still blank. He opened his laptop and tapped in a search query, Caleb Green Atlanta birth records. A firewall blocked access beyond the page. He wasn't surprised. Downstairs, the staff finished setting out the final details for brunch, enameled pitchers of juice trays of deviled eggs, and a cake molded into the shape of a bunny. Children from neighboring estates had begun to arrive, baskets ready for the egg hunt. But upstairs in the quiet of her room, Imani was struggling with something else. She stared at the envelope she'd received from her old friend Patrice, one that had slipped under her door earlier that morning. Inside were school records, old tax returns, and one fragile piece of paper she hadn't seen in years, a duplicate of Caleb's birth certificate. The blank line under father's name made her pulse thrum. She hadn't wanted to hide anything. She had only wanted peace. A knock interrupted her thoughts. Imani turned, heart suddenly racing. A housekeeper stood in the doorway. Mr. Al-Nasser is asking for you. His study. Did he say why? He said... The woman hesitated. He said, It's time. Imani nodded slowly, folding the paper and slipping it into her sleeve. She took her time walking through the marble corridors, her heels soft against the Persian rugs. The house seemed stiller than usual, like it too was holding its breath. At the study door, She paused, lifted her hand, but before she could knock, the door opened from within. Rafik stood there. No greeting, no smile. His eyes didn't flicker. "Sit," he said, simply stepping aside. "We're going to talk about the truth." Rafik stood at the window, one hand gripping the edge of the curtain, like it might keep him grounded. Outside, the ocean rolled in soft, indifferent waves, the sky overcast and still. Inside the study, it was colder than usual, not in temperature, but in presence. Imani sat across from him, spine-straight, hands folded in her lap, her eyes meeting his with a quiet storm behind them. He placed the paper on the desk between them, the copy of Caleb's birth certificate. "You left the father's name blank," he said, voice even. Imani didn't blink, because it didn't matter to the hospital, only to us. "And the bracelet." He stepped closer, holding out his phone. A zoomed-in image from a security camera showed Caleb sleeping, the small bracelet glinting under the lamp. That bracelet belonged to Layla. She had it custom-made in Morocco. Imani looked at the image, then slowly back at him. "It was a gift from the nurse at the hospital. That's what they told me." He stared at her a moment longer, like he was peeling back layers of skin with his eyes. "You've lied," he said. "Not just once." "I haven't," she replied calmly. "You've made assumptions. I let you. That's manipulation." "No." Her voice was steady. "That's survival." The air grew thick. Rafik walked behind his desk, keeping distance now. "Do you think I'm a fool, that you could enter my home, charm your way into my world, and hide a child's identity in plain sight?" Imani stood, not abrupt, just final. "I came because your money was supposed to go to a children's shelter," she said. "I stayed because I had nowhere else to go, and I survived here by keeping my head down and my heart guarded. You used your son. I never used Caleb." Her voice rose for the first time. "You looked at him and saw yourself. That terrified you." A long silence. Then very quietly he said, "You need to leave." Her lips parted slightly, not in shock, in hurt. She nodded once. "I'll pack our things." As she turned toward the door, his voice stopped her one last time. "I trusted you, Imani." She didn't look back. "That was your choice, not my deception." She left the room, not with fury, not with shame, but with the kind of dignity only a mother walking away for her child can wear. Upstairs, Caleb was napping. She packed quietly, folding his tiny shirts, slipping crayons into a worn canvas bag, brushing her fingers over the drawing he'd left on the nightstand. A little house by the sea, stick figure mommy, stick figure Caleb, a tall man with glasses at the piano, underneath our spring house, where mommy laughed. She didn't cry. Layla watched from the balcony as Imani and Caleb stepped into the waiting Uber. A tight smirk pulled at her lips, but her eyes, they weren't celebrating. They were calculating. Back inside, Abuela Rosa found Rafik alone in the drawing room, hands resting on the closed lid of the piano. "I thought you learned," she said softly. "I did." "Then why does the house feel colder now than it ever did before she came?" He didn't answer. He simply lifted the lid and stared at the untouched keys. The hotel room smelled faintly of bleach and fading dreams. Imani sat on the edge of the twin bed, smoothing out the frayed edge of a pillowcase that had seen better years. Caleb was curled up under the thin blanket, his face pale despite the warm room. The hum of the air conditioner was too loud, the light too harsh, the world too wrong. She hadn't eaten since morning. Her stomach grumbled, but she didn't move. Across the room, the duffel bag lay half unzipped, Caleb's drawing sticking out like a small flag of surrender. The note she'd left behind still haunted her. "We took nothing. Thank you for the roof." Imani. She wondered if he'd read it, wondered if he cared. There was a knock on the door. Her heart jumped, but it was just the receptionist. "Ma'am, you got mail down at the front." Someone dropped off a small envelope. Imani walked down the hall, shoeless. Her steps were slow, like the floor might collapse with the weight of her doubts. At the front desk, she accepted the plain envelope, her name scrawled on the front. Inside, a folded page from Caleb's coloring book. A smiling sun, uneven but bright, with 5 words in shaky crayon letters. Don't cry. Lemon pie, Mommy. She bit her lip, holding back the sob. Their secret word. The one they made up when he was scared during hospital visits. Lemon pie meant hope. Lemon pie meant home. She rushed back upstairs, heart racing. But when she opened the door, Caleb was hunched over, trembling. Mommy, he whispered. My tummy hurts. She rushed to him. He was burning up. Caleb, look at me, baby. She lifted his wrist. The bracelet. It shimmered under the fluorescent light, a faint glow like something chemical. And then his body slumped. No, 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 no. She fumbled for her phone, hands shaking. 911, my son, he passed out. He's burning up. Please send someone. Room 204, Sunrise Motor Inn. Tears blurred her vision as she held him close, rocking. I'm here, baby. I'm here. Don't close your eyes. The sirens were still far away. Her voice cracked with panic. Please, someone help him help. A firm hand landed on her shoulder. She froze. That sent sandalwood and something colder. Rafik. He crouched beside her, his eyes locked on Caleb, then on the bracelet. Come with me. Now. Imani barely registered the blur of movement. Rafik shouting down the hallway, the arrival of paramedics, the flash of red and white lights outside. She held Caleb's small hand as they rushed him into the ambulance, but her gaze stayed locked on Rafik. He didn't say a word during the ride. At the hospital, a black woman in blue scrubs met them at the ER entrance. Imani Green, she asked, eyeing the child being wheeled in. I'm Dr. Langston. We'll do everything we can. Imani nodded, trying to keep it together. Rafik remained by her side, though his expression gave nothing away. Hours passed. Dr. Langston returned, holding a clipboard. Your son had an acute allergic reaction, contact dermatitis systemic. We traced it to a high concentration of nickel in that bracelet. It triggered the episode. Imani blinked. The bracelet. Rafik's eyes darkened. He's stable now. He needs rest. But no more exposure to nickel, the doctor added, placing a gentle hand on Imani's arm. It's a common enough allergy, but in children with sensitivity like Caleb's, it can be serious. Imani sank into the chair in the corner of the room. Her mind was racing, but her body felt hollowed out. Rafik stood across from her, arms crossed, but something in his face had cracked. Layla gave it to him, he said finally. Imani looked up. She said it was from a nurse, he continued, almost to himself. I believed her. I wanted to believe her. Imani didn't respond. She didn't have the energy to argue or explain anymore. But then something shifted. Rafik walked over to Caleb's bedside, where the boy now slept under soft lights and warm blankets. Beside him, the drawing he'd left back at the mansion was now folded and tucked under his hand. Our spring house, where Mommy laughed. Rafik stared at it for a long time. Then he turned and left the room without a word. Back at the mansion, the grand piano in the west wing had not been touched in years. That night, dust still clinging to its keys, Rafik sat alone and played the first few bars of a lullaby his mother once sang. Halting, broken, but real. The jacaranda trees had started to bloom again, their lavender petals dotting the winding driveway like confetti from a celebration no one remembered planning. The Al Nasser estate, once imposing in its silence, now carried the faint aroma of vanilla and something sweet, almost like pancakes. It was Caleb's favorite smell. Inside the kitchen, Abuela Rosa gently cracked eggs into a ceramic bowl while humming a gospel tune from her youth. Caleb stood beside her on a stool's sleeves, rolled up his little hands full of flour and mischief. Imani hovered near the counter, unsure whether to help or watch. You measure with your heart, not the spoon, Abuela Rosa said to Caleb, then shot Imani a look full of welcome. And your mama's got a heart big enough to feed the world. Imani smiled faintly, then glanced toward the hallway. She hadn't seen Rafik all morning. Since they returned 2 days ago, he'd been polite, but distant, more careful than cold, as if afraid of undoing what little trust they had managed to rebuild. She had agreed to come back for Caleb's sake, but the terms were clear. No games, no assumptions, and no pretending they were anything other than two adults trying to co-parent a situation neither had planned for. A knock at the glass door startled them. Layla stood outside holding a garment bag. Her usual armor of sarcasm and pearls seemed absent. She looked tentative. Even Caleb paused, his eyes narrowing. Imani wiped her hands and opened the door. "I brought something," Layla said quietly. "It's for the brunch this Sunday." Imani didn't move. "For me?" Layla nodded. "It was meant for someone else. But I think it might suit you better." Imani hesitated, then took the bag. The fabric inside shimmered faintly through the translucent plastic, dusty rose silk with ivory embroidery. It was understated, but elegant, not Layla's usual taste. "Thank you," Imani said, watching Layla's face. But Layla had already turned to leave. That afternoon, Rafik found Imani on the veranda. She was reading a book, but not really. Her fingers fidgeted on the edge of the page. "Do you have a minute?" he asked. She nodded, wary. "I owe you more than just safe lodging," he said. "I owe you an apology for not listening, for assuming." Imani didn't respond at first. She looked toward the horizon where the waves broke gently against the rocks. "You didn't owe me anything, but your silence said more than your accusations ever could." He exhaled. "I'm trying. I don't always know how." "I know," she said softly, then turned back to her book. "Start by not trying so hard." Later that evening, Vanessa Tran arrived. She greeted Layla with a squeal and a hug, her camera gear slung across her shoulder. "The prodigal daughter returns," she teased. "Let me guess your grandmother bribed you with pie." "Something like that," Layla murmured. Vanessa's eyes darted around. "This house is the same and yet different." Layla followed her gaze. Caleb was crouched on the floor, arranging cutlery, his tongue poking out in concentration. "We've had a few renovations," Layla said, voice low. "You mean the kind you don't need a permit for?" Vanessa replied with a wink. They shared a laugh. For a moment it felt like old times. As the adults chatted, Caleb tugged Imani's sleeve. "Can we do the napkin fold like last time the swan wedding?" "Of course," baby Imani smiled, crouching beside him. "But only if you help Nana Rosa carry the syrup pitcher." Abuela Rosa chuckled from the dining room. "Child, I've been carrying hearts heavier than syrup for decades." By sundown, the table was set. The floral centerpiece framed the place settings like a magazine spread. Rafik entered last, freshly shaven, wearing a light blue shirt that brought out the gold in his skin. He looked tired but present. Then it happened. As Caleb climbed onto his chair, he looked at Abuela Rosa and beamed. "Can I call you Nana too?" The room froze. Layla dropped her fork. Rafik looked at Imani. Abuela Rosa covered her mouth, eyes shimmering. "Of course, mi cielo," she whispered, pulling Caleb into her lap. "That would make me the happiest old lady in Florida." Tears gathered in Layla's eyes, and for the first time she didn't hide them. She turned away, pretending to adjust a candle. Vanessa behind her camera captured it all, and later, after the table was cleared and laughter still echoed faintly through the halls, Vanessa pulled Rafik aside. Her face was tight, serious now. "I need to show you something," she said. She handed him a small USB drive. "This footage was never meant to go live," she said, "but someone paid me to leak it." Guess who? Rafik stared at the small USB in his palm, like it might catch fire. The late afternoon sun bled gold across the hallway, streaking through the glass panes and catching the weight of Vanessa's words in its beams. "Layla," he said quietly. Vanessa nodded. "She used one of my assistants to get to the files. Said it was just for internal family use. But then I got tipped off when someone tried to auction the footage to a gossip outlet in Dubai." She crossed her arms, face suddenly older than it had been moments ago. "I knew better. I pulled it. But you should know it wasn't just about you." Rafik felt a coldness that had nothing to do with the air conditioning crawl under his skin. "What's on it?" he asked. "Clips from last year's investors' retreat, and some of you and Imani just angles glances, edited to look like scandal." His jaw clenched. "And she paid to leak it." "I can't prove the money trail yet," Vanessa said. but she knew what it would do. To you, to Imani, to the boy. The boy, Caleb. Rafik closed his hand around the drive. Thank you for bringing it to me. Vanessa placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. Just don't let it sit in a drawer. Secrets rot worse when you hide them. As she walked away, Rafik stood alone, weighed down by the knowledge that while he'd been trying to rebuild trust, someone close had still been setting fires behind him. Back in the music room, Caleb tapped at a few keys on the grand piano. Imani sat nearby on a tufted bench, watching her son's fingers play nonsense melodies with infectious joy. He thinks every piano is magic, she said, without looking up as Rafik entered. I used to believe that too, he said, voice soft. She glanced over her shoulder. You still play? Not well. That's not what I heard. Rafik moved closer, but stayed a respectful distance, noting how Imani's body tensed ever so slightly. I wanted to thank you, he said, for coming back, for trusting me. Again. I didn't come back for you, she replied gently. I came for Caleb. And because Abuela Rosa said, the house remembered us. His lips twitched faintly. That sounds like her. She finally met his gaze. But I stayed because something changed. Layla's quieter. The staff doesn't stare as much. And you look tired but honest. He nodded. I'm trying to live without the mask. She raised an eyebrow. And how's that going? Harder than I thought. Caleb ran to them, holding a folded piece of paper. Mommy, can we hang this on the fridge? Imani unfolded it. It was a new drawing him, Abuela Rosa, and Rafik at the brunch table. Imani stood behind them with a spatula. At the bottom in crooked letters he'd written, My family smells like pancakes. She laughed. Of course, baby. Let's put it right next to lemon pie. Later that evening, Layla stood alone in the garden, sipping a glass of water that trembled slightly in her grip. The jacaranda petals fell around her feet like whispers. Abuela Rosa joined her, settling onto the nearby bench with the slow grace of someone who had seen too much but still chose gentleness. They don't hate you, Rosa said after a long silence. Layla didn't answer. They're confused, hurt, but not hateful. I don't know how to undo what I did, Layla murmured. You don't. You live differently. That's the apology. Layla sat down, her spine rigid. Do you think he'll forgive me? She asked. Forgiveness isn't something you earn, Rosa said. It's something you stop running from. Layla looked out across the garden where Caleb had tied streamers to the lemon tree, claiming it was now their celebration corner. For a moment she allowed herself to breathe. The next morning bloomed with a kind of peace the mansion hadn't known in years. Sunlight spilled through tall windows, soft and forgiving, as if it too had decided to give everyone a second chance. In the kitchen, the scent of cinnamon and brown sugar floated through the air. Imani flipped pancakes while Caleb danced in mismatched socks, narrating his moves like a Saturday morning cartoon character. Every so often he peeked at the drawing now proudly displayed on the fridge, as if checking that his words still rang true. My family smells like pancakes. Abuela Rosa entered with a watering can and a gentle smile. Breakfast for the soul, she murmured, watching the scene. Just like my mama used to say. Imani glanced over her shoulder. There's enough for everyone. Then I'll take mine with extra love, Rosa said, setting down her can and sitting at the small table. Moments later, Rafik appeared in the doorway. His presence, once heavy and distant, now carried a quiet humility. He wore a soft gray sweater sleeves, pushed up the kind that made him look more like a man trying to rebuild something than a billionaire trying to protect it. Morning, he said, eyes scanning the room, not for threat, but for connection. Imani handed him a plate without a word. He took it, offering a grateful nod, then sat beside Caleb, who was now busy drawing more family pictures, this one including a small dog with a cape. I didn't know we had a superhero pup, Rafik said. Caleb giggled. We will, someday. The small talk carried them through breakfast, but everyone could feel it. Something hovered in the background, unsaid but waiting. Vanessa's USB, Layla's betrayal, the wound under the bandage. Later that day, preparations for the Mother's Day preview brunch filled the house with low murmurs and clinking glasses. Florists fluttered in and out, decorators placed place cards, and photographers tested angles in the soft afternoon light. Vanessa set up her gear discreetly in the garden. She'd said what needed to be said. Now the footage sat in Rafiq's study, locked in a drawer, neither opened nor forgotten. Imani helped Caleb into a button-up shirt and tiny bow tie. He pouted dramatically. "Do I have to look fancy?" She smiled, straightening his collar. "You just have to look like yourself, baby." Outside, Layla moved from table to table, not giving orders, but quietly fixing small imperfections. A crooked napkin, a misplaced vase. She still hadn't spoken to Rafiq. But once she passed Imani and murmured, "Thank you for wearing the dress." Imani, surprised, looked down at the soft rose silk. It fit perfectly, as if stitched with intention rather than expectation. "I didn't wear it for you," she replied. "I know," Layla said and walked away. As the sun dipped lower, casting gold across the garden, Rafiq called Imani aside. "I need to tell you something," he said, his voice calm but weighted. She followed him to the study. On the desk sat the USB. He didn't sit. Neither did she. "She paid to have this leaked," he said, tapping the drive. "Not just to hurt me, but to humiliate you. And Caleb." Imani's spine stiffened. "I'm sorry," Rafiq said, "for letting her get that close to what matters." She studied him carefully. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because I want you to stay. Not as someone I owe, but as someone I choose." A pause. "You don't have to decide today," he added. Imani's voice was steady. "I already did." They stood in silence, not touching, but the space between them felt warmer than any embrace. That evening, as stars blinked awake over the ocean, and the guests filtered out with full stomachs and satisfied smiles, the Al Nasser estate felt different. Still opulent, still guarded, but no longer hollow. In Caleb's room, the boy slept with a crayon clutched in his fist and a pancake sticker on his cheek. Abuela Rosa sat in the hallway, knitting something yellow and soft. Layla emerged from the guest wing, stopping when she saw her. "I used to think guilt was weakness," Layla said, not quite looking at her. Rosa didn't stop knitting. "It's just truth trying to breathe." Layla sat beside her, silent. After a while, she whispered, "I think I'm ready to let it." Under the jacaranda trees in full bloom, soft purple petals drifted onto linen-covered tables set for the Mother's Day brunch. The ocean's breath carried laughter and the faint scent of citrus blossoms across the lawn where Rafiq had insisted on keeping things small and meaningful. Imani stood quietly near the French doors, her rose silk dress catching in the breeze, the same one Layla had given her weeks ago. What she hadn't known until that morning was that it once belonged to Layla's stepmother, a woman who, despite never fully being accepted, had left behind a letter meant for healing. Layla had handed it to her, folded in worn ivory stationery, saying only she wanted someone to understand. Imani had read the words alone in the library, sunlight hitting the parchment just right. It spoke of love that isn't always loud, pain that hides behind pride, and the wish that one day Layla would let go of her fear of being replaced. "She tried to love me," Layla had whispered when Imani returned. "I just wasn't ready." Imani didn't offer platitudes. She simply placed a hand on Layla's shoulder and left it there until they both felt steadier. Outside, Caleb bounced on the grass arms, flailing with excitement as he directed his stage crew, which consisted of 2 gardeners and a confused poodle wearing a bow tie. "Okay, this is where the princess saves the house with pancakes," he announced. Abuela Rosa chuckled from her chair near the garden path, crocheting a sunflower-patterned shawl. "This child will be mayor one day, or a very joyful troublemaker." Rafiq emerged from the kitchen wearing an apron dusted with flour and a grin that hadn't seen daylight in years. "I let him pour the batter," he said to Imani, wiping his hands on a towel. "There may be more pancake on the ceiling than the griddle." Imani smiled. "He'll remember that more than any brunch." Rafiq studied her for a moment. "So will I." The tables filled slowly with familiar faces, Rose's friends from the church, a few old community leaders, and even Vanessa Tran, who brought wildflowers from her garden and a quiet sparkle in her eyes. Layla stood by Rosa most of the morning, helping with chairs and fussing over name cards. At one point, she knelt beside Caleb and whispered something that made him gasp, then hug her tight around the waist. "Really?" he asked. "Only if your mom says yes," she replied, glancing at Imani with something close to admiration. When brunch was served, Rafik and Caleb carried out the trays banana pancakes with chocolate chips arranged into smiley faces. Rafik set one down in front of Imani with a wink. Chef Caleb insisted on extra syrup. As guests settled into their meals, a gentle clinking of glass caught their attention. Rafik stood holding a small envelope. "Before we begin, I want to recognize someone whose presence has changed more than just this house. Imani Green. Would you join me?" All eyes turned. Imani hesitated, but Rosa nodded with a kind smile, and Caleb was already waving her forward. She rose slowly and walked to the center lawn where Rafik waited. He offered her the microphone, but she gently pushed it aside. "I only have one thing to say," she said softly, looking out at the quiet, waiting faces. Then turning to her son, "This is my why." Caleb ran to her, grabbed her hand, and kissed it solemnly. "This is my mommy," he declared. "She saved my world." A hush fell over the guests, followed by scattered claps that grew louder, warmer, until the garden seemed to swell with it. Imani knelt and kissed Caleb's forehead. Rafik leaned closer. "You've saved mine too." The applause gradually faded into soft conversations and the gentle clinking of forks on porcelain. Guests returned to their meals, but the warmth of the moment lingered in the air like sunshine that refused to be swallowed by clouds. Rafik remained standing by Imani's side. His hands were no longer in his pockets, no longer guarded. He pulled from his blazer an object simple, not a ring, not a box. A slim, dark blue savings ledger, the kind that banks no longer issued, except by special request. He extended it to her. Imani looked down at it, her brow knitting. "For the health center you dreamed of," Rafik said, voice steady, almost reverent. "You once told Caleb that if you ever had a chance, you'd build a place where mothers wouldn't have to choose between dinner and medicine." I listened. She took it slowly, opening to the first page. Her breath caught. It wasn't a trust in her name. It wasn't even shared. It was a donation, fully in the name of the future Green Family Health and Healing Center. "You're not buying me," she said softly. "No," he replied. "This isn't for you. It's because of you." He stepped back, giving her room. Not claiming, not demanding, just present. Layla watched from the side of the garden, her expression unreadable. She turned toward Abuela Rosa, who gave her a slight nod, the kind that spoke without a word. Now is the moment. Layla stood and crossed the grass, stopping in front of Imani, who still held the ledger against her chest, like something both fragile and sacred. "I have something for you too," Layla said, and her voice didn't carry mockery or coldness. This time it carried effort. "A letter. My stepmother left it with my lawyer before she passed. I was supposed to give it to someone I trusted when I finally stopped being angry." Imani met her eyes, stunned. Layla offered the sealed envelope with trembling fingers. "I thought I hated her, but maybe I just hated feeling forgotten. Then I watched Caleb call Rosa Nana, and it didn't make me jealous. It made me feel like I hadn't lost a brother. I'd gained a sister." The words slipped out and settled into the air like a final note in a hymn. Imani's eyes glistened. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to," Layla said, stepping back. "Just wear the dress, read the letter, and if he ever hurts you again, I'll make sure he regrets it." There was a pause. Then both women laughed, short, surprised, genuine. Near the back of the crowd, Vanessa Tran wiped a tear and nudged Rafik. "I have a cousin in Houston," she whispered, mischief in her tone. "Worse than you ever were. Interested in a redemption project?" He chuckled but said nothing. His eyes were on Imani, who was now crouching beside Caleb as he rearranged his stage of overturned crates and flower pots. "I'm almost ready," Caleb declared, waving a paper crown. "Do we get programs?" Layla called out. "Nope." Caleb grinned, just clapping. Imani took her seat again beside Rosa, holding the letter unopened in her lap. Not because she wasn't ready, but because something about waiting just a little longer felt right. And when Rafik slid into the seat beside her, the space between them no longer heavy with unspoken pain, but full of what could be, she leaned just slightly until her shoulder met his. The garden shimmered in the afternoon light, but it was the laughter that made it home. The sun dipped lower, casting soft golden hues across the lawn, as the last of the guests finished their tea and lemon tartlets. Near the garden's edge, a makeshift stage had been assembled, 3 overturned crates, draped with a white tablecloth Caleb had insisted was very royal. The audience, comprised of guests still lingering after brunch, turned their attention to the 6-year-old director, playwright, and lead actor. Caleb stood tall in his paper crown and slightly oversized blazer, borrowed from one of the security guards and cinched with a pink ribbon. Rafik adjusted the lens on his phone camera. "You're sure I'm only allowed to film and not assist?" "Yes, Mr. Daddy," Caleb said with authority. "You're in the audience now. No interfering." Imani choked on her laugh. The boy cleared his throat, then gestured dramatically to a poodle in a tiara, Vanessa's very confused dog. "Presenting My Family is Awesome, written, directed, and made up by me, Caleb Green Al Nasser." Maybe. That last maybe earned chuckles. The play itself was a blend of pancake references, a dragon named Nickel, who made everyone itchy, and a magic garden where people became family if they shared secrets and said thank you out loud. In the middle of his story, Caleb turned to Abuela Rosa, who sat front and center, wrapped in her sunflower shawl. "Can I call you Nana too?" he asked, voice soft, suddenly no longer playing. Abuela Rosa didn't answer at first. She rose, walked up to him, and pressed a kiss to his forehead. "You already do, mijo." A hush swept the lawn. Even the wind quieted. Then Caleb faced the crowd again. "And now," he declared, raising his arms, "let's clap for Mr. Daddy now." The applause came first in bursts. Vanessa Rosa Layla then spread like wildfire across the garden. Rafik sat frozen for a heartbeat, the words hanging in the air. "Mr. Daddy." He didn't try to correct it, didn't explain that it wasn't official, that he hadn't asked, hadn't signed anything yet. Because in Caleb's world, love had already made the decision. Imani reached across the space between their chairs and took Rafik's hand. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. The applause continued, washing over them like a tide. Not for a title, not for a proposal, but for something harder to name and easier to feel. A boy's joy, a family reborn. And in that sun-drenched moment, no one asked how it all began. Only that it was real and it was theirs. Sometimes it's not the grand gestures, but the quiet ones, the pancakes on a lonely morning, the hand held in silence that reveal who truly sees us. Through hardship, misunderstandings, and healing, a woman once dismissed found not just a home, but a place where her worth was never questioned. When we stop judging by appearances, we open space for love to do its quiet, transformative work. Because kindness, like sunlight through a cracked window, always finds its way back in. If this story touched something tender in you, maybe today is the day to offer warmth to someone who feels unseen.